Have you ever given so much of yourself to love that you forgot who you were? In today's story, we explore the journey of a man who dared to love again at 70, and how losing himself in that love led to the most important lesson of all, the power of returning to himself. Through heartbreak, emotional storms, and painful realizations, he discovered that true freedom isn't found in being loved by another, it's found in self-respect, emotional mastery, and inner peace. This video dives deep into the Stoic wisdom of letting go, observing emotions, and reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we often trade away without knowing. If you've ever struggled between holding on and letting go, between pleasing others and staying true to yourself, stay with us. What you'll find here isn't just a story, it's a blueprint for real strength, silent freedom, and living with unshakable dignity. When an ageless heart dares to love again. Have you ever asked yourself if the sacrifices you are making for love are truly worth it? Today's story follows a man, at the age of 70, who still courageously steps onto a journey many would have abandoned by then, the journey of the heart. At an age where society expects resignation and stillness, he chooses a different path. A path he approaches with both eagerness and hesitation. He is not seeking an idealized love from books, nor hoping for a sweet repetition of the past. What he longs for is revival, a rekindling of the inner flame he thought had long since faded, a reminder that he is still alive, still capable of loving and being loved. An unexpected encounter seems to illuminate the dusty corners of his soul. A relationship begins, bathed in the warm light of hope and newness. In her eyes, he sees a reflection of someone he had almost forgotten, a man full of vitality, full of the capacity for love. Yet, even from those earliest moments, he hears the faint whispers of doubt. His friends, who have weathered many storms with him, subtly express concern. His children, with the bluntness of deep love, voice their worries without hesitation. And above all, deep within his own heart, he feels a quiet call, be careful. But how can the heart resist the invitation of a feeling it thought it had lost? How can reason quickly silence the yearning to relive the moments of youth, when everything still seemed limitless? With all the courage, and perhaps a touch of lingering innocence, he steps forward. And there, at the threshold of new love, our story begins. A story not only about love, but about reclaiming emotional self-mastery, reviving clarity of thought, and finding the strength to make decisive choices at the most critical moments of life. A flame of hope rekindled in the twilight years. From the very first meeting, she ignited within him a feeling both strange and deeply familiar. It was not simply the attraction between a man and a woman. It was a silent calling, a vigorous awakening from the deepest parts of his soul, long covered by the dust of passing years. She was different. Her smile, her way of speaking, the attentive look in her eyes, all made him feel seen, understood, something he had not felt for a long, long time. With each moment spent with her, he felt youth return, not in the strength of his muscles or the quickness of his body, but in the resurrection of his spirit, in the longing to live, to love, to connect. His friends, who had witnessed many of his joys and sorrows, discreetly voiced concern. They saw things that, in the intoxication of revival, he was unwilling to acknowledge. His children were more direct. Out of genuine love, they expressed their worries about motives, about the vast differences in age, lifestyle, and values that might be too difficult to bridge. He listened. But by then, his heart had already raced ahead of his mind. Part of him knew the road would not be smooth. But the other part, the part yearning to live again, was stronger. He was not blind. He simply chose to believe in goodness. He wanted to believe that sometimes, miracles could still happen, even at an age when most count time only by the waiting. And so, he stepped forward. No hesitation. No calculations. He offered his heart as a gift, hoping that through this woman, he might rediscover the warmth life had seemingly taken from him. In her eyes, he saw reflected a man he had forgotten, a man still full of passion, still attractive, still capable of deep love. And it was that feeling, the feeling of living fully, of seeing himself again, that made him set aside vague fears, rational warnings, and the cautions of those who loved him. The flame of hope did not blaze fiercely, but it glowed warmly, steadily, enough to warm the coldest corners of a heart that had weathered many winters. In that moment, he believed he had found a small, precious miracle, the ability to love and be loved. At any age. He did not yet know that this flame, if not tended carefully, could also burn away the things he valued most. His dignity, his inner peace, and the clarity he had spent a lifetime cultivating. But at that moment, with complete sincerity, he knew only one thing. He could still feel. He could still love. And for him, that was enough to take the leap. When the small signs begin to creep in. The early days were like a beautiful dream. He felt reborn, younger, stronger. This woman made him feel that time was merely a number, that age could not restrain a heart that still knew how to love. But then, like a chill wind slipping into spring, the small signs began to creep into the cracks of the relationship. At first, they were so subtle they were almost invisible. A casual suggestion about dressing more stylishly. A gentle reminder to take better care of his appearance. He accepted these seemingly caring suggestions with gratitude, eager to become better in her eyes. But as the requests became clearer, as the advice carried a tone of pressure, he still tried to overlook it. He told himself it was just a generational difference, an expression of her hopes. Each time, he adjusted a little more, hoping that these small changes would bring them closer. He laughed off jokes about his age. He stayed silent at the accidental comparisons she made between him and younger men. He convinced himself that love required adaptation, required generosity, that such trivial things were not worth risking their precious bond. But he did not realize that with every attempt to please, a small part of his true self was being eroded. He began to step out of himself to become a version she wanted. No longer the man he once took pride in being. The small signs, an impatient look, a frown when he shared old stories, a forced smile at his memories, slowly wove a fragile but tightening net around his soul. Occasionally, in rare moments of clarity, he asked himself, "Am I losing something far more important than this love?" But the fear of losing that rare, vibrant feeling quickly pushed away his doubts. He delved deeper into the journey, believing that with just a little more effort, love would bloom again as it did in those first days. And in that silent effort, he failed to see that he was trading away something more valuable than any relationship. His self-respect, his inner freedom, and his ability to maintain clarity of mind. When the small signs first creep in, they do not immediately destroy. They work silently, patiently, waiting. And only once they are deeply rooted in trust and longing, do they blossom into consequences that are hard to reverse. But at that time, he did not yet see. Or perhaps, he was not yet ready to face it. Words of criticism that cut deep. At first, her remarks were like light breezes, brushing the surface of his pride without leaving deep marks. A joke about the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. A fleeting glance at the weariness in a body no longer as agile as it once was. He laughed along, nodded at her suggestions for self-improvement, believing it was simply her subtle way of caring. But gradually, that subtlety disappeared. The criticisms were no longer wrapped in gentleness. They became sharper, more open, at times laced with contempt she no longer bothered to hide. "A man at your age should take better care of himself, it's pitiful otherwise. You should understand that not every woman has the patience for slowness." At first, he tried to brush off these words. He made excuses for her. She was young, inexperienced in understanding the richness he carried. He reassured himself that love required patience, generosity. But each word was like a tiny needle, piercing the protective shell he had spent his life building. They did not cause immediate pain, but slowly, they hollowed deep, leaving persistent wounds. He began to look at himself in the mirror differently. No longer through the proud eyes of a man who had lived fully, but through eyes that scrutinized every wrinkle. Every trace of time once embraced as a natural breeze of life. The self-confidence that had been his foundation through life's storms began to waver. The criticisms no longer stayed on the surface, they found a way into the deepest places he thought were well guarded. He noticed himself behaving differently. Trying to dress younger. Trying to change his manner of speaking, his gait, just to feel worthy in her eyes. At some point, he had shifted from a man who loved freely to a man striving to prove his worth. Love was no longer a sharing, it became a silent race against himself, against time. And slowly, silent anxiety took root. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being left behind. The fear that no amount of effort could outrun the inevitable shadow of age. In the heavy silence of the night, he listened to the quiet pain seeping into his mind, a pain that didn't scream but carved itself deeper into his heart day by day. The criticisms, whether casual or deliberate, did not just wound his outer pride. They began to corrode something far more sacred, his belief in his own worth. And when a man starts doubting his own value, it is not just a momentary hurt. It is the foundation for a slow, silent, and inevitable collapse. A moment of clarity amid the emotional darkness. Sometimes, the greatest turning points in life do not come from dramatic events. They arrive in silence, when you stand before yourself with nowhere left to hide. That night, after a cruel conversation where her every word felt like a cold knife cutting into his fragile pride, he returned home quietly. The familiar room felt alien. The old mirror in the living room reflected the image of a man he barely recognized. The face was still his. But the look in the eyes had changed. Not just the marks of age. Not just the weariness of the body. But a doubt about his own worth, a certainty he had spent his whole life building. He gazed into his own eyes for a long time. And for the first time in months, he was not seeking validation from anyone. He simply faced himself, raw and honest. A slow question rose from deep within. Who am I living for? Am I still truly myself? This clarity did not strike like lightning. It crept in like an underground stream, washing away the illusions he had clung to. He remembered his younger years, difficult decisions he had made with courage, times he stood alone against pressure to defend what he believed was right. Back then, he never needed anyone's approval to affirm his worth. He lived with self-respect as an inseparable part of his being. So why now, at this stage of life? Was he kneeling for someone else's acceptance? Why was his heart driven by the fear of abandonment, rather than the clarity of his own convictions? He knew that if he continued down this path, he would not only lose love but also the most precious part of himself, his dignity and inner freedom. In the thick darkness of emotions, a small light flickered to life. Not the light of hope in her love, but the light of love for himself. A love that did not require anyone's permission. A quiet but enduring love, built from experience, pain, and a courage honed through a lifetime. He realized it was time to choose. To choose between continuing to sacrifice himself for a crumbling affection, or to walk alone with the wholeness of his dignity intact. In that moment, decisiveness, the trait he thought he had lost, returned. He no longer sought reasons to stay. He no longer made excuses for the wounds. He knew one simple, solid truth. If a love demands the sacrifice of your self-respect, it is no longer love. And so, once again, he chose himself. Not out of bitterness. Not out of pride. But out of gratitude to life, life that had taught him that true worth is never negotiable. Silent rebirth, the first step back to himself. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. No more waiting for text messages. No more appointments to prepare for. No one demanding he become someone other than himself. The house was silent, but for the first time in months, that silence was no longer oppressive. It was clean. Still. Strangely. It was full of life. He brewed himself a cup of tea, sat on his familiar wooden chair by the window, and simply breathed. Not trying to plan the future. Not blaming the past. Simply being present. For the first time in a long while, he no longer had to wear any mask. There was sadness, yes. There was emptiness, yes. But the sadness was clear, like a summer rain. Not tinted by despair. But a gentle sadness from letting go of a dream that no longer fit. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. But by taking each step truthfully, he was slowly rebuilding himself from within. He started doing the simple things he had long neglected. Calling an old friend, just to reconnect. Opening the books that had once kept him company. Walking slowly through the park. Not in a rush, not needing anyone to notice. Each small action was like laying a brick for a new home inside himself, a home of wholeness that no longer relied on the gaze or approval of others. This silence was no longer loneliness, it was sacred space to hear his own voice again. The voice that had been drowned out by the demands and expectations of others now rang clearer than ever. And in each slow breath, each patient step, he realized. Rebirth does not come from flipping a new page. Rebirth comes when you dare to face everything that has been, accept it, learn from it. And then choose a different way to live, braver, more awake. That day, in the quiet, he was no longer the man who had failed at love. He had become the man learning to love himself, fully, and freely. Priceless lessons that only time can give. Time does not merely heal wounds, it also offers invaluable gifts to those who are patient, understanding and growth. In those quiet days, he began to look back on the past not with resentment, nor with self-pity. He saw it as an essential part of the journey he had to undergo, to grow once more, even at the age of 70. He realized that true love never demands that someone change so much that they lose themselves. Love is not a race for acceptance, nor is it about enduring in the hope of being validated. True love is when two people can be present with each other in full authenticity, and still be cherished. He also understood that a person's worth does not fade with time. Each wrinkle on his face, each silver strand in his hair, carried the story of courage, of falling and rising again, of the loves and losses that had shaped the man he had become. The greatest lesson he received was perhaps the lesson of loving himself. A love that was not flashy, not loud, but persistent, and one that could not be taken away by anyone's rejection. He learned to love his scars, his imperfections, and to be grateful for the pain that had taught him strength. And above all, he realized. No matter how many highs and lows life brings, self-respect and inner peace are treasures that no one, and no circumstance, can take away unless we allow it. These lessons did not come from easy moments. They were born from brokenness. And precisely because of that, they became the firm foundation on which he continued to walk, this time, with awareness and deep gratitude for himself. The journey back to inner peace. He realized that peace does not come from the outside. It is not found in the presence of another person, nor in words of praise or admiring glances. Peace only arises when a person stops demanding the world to fill the void within. Day by day, he practiced slowing down. No longer rushing to find someone to fill the emptiness. No longer craving to see himself through the eyes of another. He learned to savor silence, where no dialogue existed except for the quiet conversation between himself and his soul. Each morning, upon waking, he spent a few minutes sitting by the window, simply breathing, feeling the soft beams of light seep into his small room. He no longer counted what he had lost. He began to count the small, precious things life was still silently offering: a fresh morning, a fragrant cup of tea, an old book that recalled a time long past. Peace did not rush in like a great wave. It came like the first rains of the season, slowly soaking into the soil, softening the cracks left behind by pain. And gradually, he understood. No relationship, no love, no external validation can replace a sincere relationship with oneself. Only when he let go of the need to be accepted, the need to be loved in a particular way, did he truly find freedom. Only when he stopped searching for perfection, in others or in himself, did he finally touch unconditional peace. It was a journey not marked by drama or noise, but by the greatest courage. The journey of returning to himself, embracing all that had been, all that was, and all that would be. And in that journey, he realized, peace is not a destination. Peace is the way we walk, each day, through all the storms of life. Observing emotions, the art of inner mastery. During the time of rebuilding his life, he began to learn a new lesson. Do not react immediately to every emotion that arises. Observe it, like a person standing on a riverbank, watching the water flow without rushing to dive in. At first, this was not easy. When old memories surged, when sadness, anger, and at times even self-doubt arose, the natural reaction was to push them away, or to let them overwhelm him. But this time, he chose a different way. He sat still. When sadness came, he did not run. When disappointment knocked, he did not judge. He simply acknowledged their presence, like accepting a winter rain, without needing to love it or resist it. He learned to place distance between emotion and action. Just because he felt lonely did not mean he had to rush to fill the void. Just because he felt hurt did not mean he had to retaliate with harsh words or bitterness. Each time he succeeded in observing rather than being swept away, he felt a new freedom blossom within him. A freedom not born from controlling circumstances, but from mastering himself. He realized that emotions are merely temporary phenomena. They come, and they go. They rise in strength, and they fade. True strength is not about extinguishing emotions. It is about standing firm amid them, with the steadfastness of someone who knows, I am not my emotions. The art of inner mastery is not cold rigidity. It is the softness of someone who knows how to listen without being absorbed, who knows how to feel without losing their way. Through persistent practice, day by day, he built a silent but enduring strength. A strength that came from within, independent of anyone's presence or absence. And then, he understood. When we learn to observe our emotions, we are no longer victims of inner turbulence. We become the leaders of our own lives. Letting go of what lies beyond control, the key to inner freedom. Through months of observing emotions and walking in silence, he gradually grasped a profound truth he had never truly touched before. We cannot control the emotions, thoughts, or actions of others. We can only control how we react, and the path we choose for ourselves. Reflecting on his past relationship, he realized that most of his pain did not stem from what she did or did not do. Pain arose from his expectation that she love him in a certain way, that she validate his worth, that she see the parts of him he longed to be seen. When those expectations were unmet, he trapped himself in cycles of disappointment and self-doubt. Now, he learned to let go of what lay beyond his control. No longer trying to change others. No longer clinging to the desire for recognition or understanding from anyone. He returned to the only thing he truly possessed. Himself. His thoughts. His reactions. His values. Whenever old sadness knocked, he gently reminded himself, that is beyond my control. Whenever memories of rejection arose, he smiled softly, this emotion may come and go. But my dignity remains. Letting go did not mean denying emotions. It was the conscious choice not to let things beyond his reach destroy his inner peace. The more he let go, the more spacious his heart became. No longer cramped by unreasonable expectations. No longer suffocated by unnecessary battles. And so, naturally, in that newfound freedom, he felt the simple joy of living. Being himself. In all his imperfections. Loving life, not because it was perfect, but because it was truly worth living. By letting go of what lay beyond his control, he found a kind of freedom that no one could take away, inner freedom. A freedom that allowed him to walk through life with steady feet, serene eyes, and a heart full of gratitude. From then on, he no longer lived to prove anything to anyone. He lived to befriend himself. And in that friendship, he found everything he had ever sought in others: understanding, acceptance, unconditional love.